Chapter 1. Tracker had been trolling the beach at night, unable to sleep. Restless. Too many nights and days doing nothing more than standing looking up at the moon and picking up women, then listening to them moan with pleasure of having rough sex, and complaining about how their men weren't able to satisfy them in the way Tracker could. A few of his pickups didn't want to leave him, but he pushed them out and brought in another, and by week's end he was bored and restless again. It was then he made up his mind to leave, alone. He quietly pushed open the door to Thorn and Zoey's room, in the resort suite he and Thorn had rented in San Diego for a week. Their rooms were filled with expensive dark wicker furniture and white cushions, the kind you would find in Hawaii or the islands in a fancy hotel, floral colors of green, pink, beige, and purple, the walls covered with ornate wallpaper of beige and large green leaves, colors females loved and males detested. In the corner facing an ornamental fireplace, velvet chairs and a green velvet sofa sat facing a large Sony flat screen hung over the fireplace mantel. The sheer curtains opened up to a patio where Zoey, Thorn, and Tracker sat in the evenings and watched the sunburst of orange and yellow as if disappearing into the Pacific Ocean. This was Zoey's idea of a fun time. For Tracker it was pure hell, but then it wasn't about Tracker anymore. It was what Thorn wanted, and Thorn wanted whatever Zoey wanted. After dinner and in the dark star-filled sky, Zoey stripped of her scant clothing, a sheer dress with no bra and underwear. She scurried down the stairs, onto the beach, and into the water, oblivious of who was watching, and who was standing on their balconies taking in the beautiful naked form of a young blonde woman disappearing into the surf. Tracker watched her most nights when he wasn't taking a woman on all fours on the floor. He watched as Thorn and Zoey frolicked in the water, and then went out for a swim. At the beginning, Tracker appeared to be bothered knowing he had turned her away when she was eager to be part of a threesome, and Thorn had wanted to share her to please his brother and his alpha, but Tracker took his frustrations out on the next woman banging on his door, wishing to be next in line to be taken and abused by the cold, aloof werewolf, who in all knowledge to them was only a cold man who knew how to satisfy their unsatisfied lust. Knowing how much Thorn craved and needed Zoey, Tracker couldn't deny Thorn the love he sought, and had finally found with her. Tracker didn't love Zoey, and he could never be true to her. He would break her heart, as he had done with Sadia. There was something empty inside he had to fill. The purpose of stopping before they went on to Mexico was to give Zoey a rest. Relaxing on the sand and swimming was what all of them needed. Well, not Tracker. He needed to be on the road in the forest, chasing down animals, and fucking women. The first of the month the moon would be full, and it held sway over him, because he didn't want to control himself. He rejoiced in that wild animal part in him, which the moon brought about. He needed to be on the road riding his Harley. He needed to be on the road riding an assortment of women, to keep from thinking about Sadia or Zoey. A slight early morning breeze blew in from the Pacific, straining the beige sheer curtains, sending them fluttering in the breeze, and forcing the sheet back which covered the two naked bodies as they lay entwined. Zoey's small curvy legs lay over Thorn's, and she had her head resting on his chest, with his large left hand planted between her legs, and the other holding her passionately to him. Tracker took in all of Zoey's exposed nude body, and he gave a low grunt and then another. He thought of their time together. The moan came from deep inside him, but it didn't wake the two who appeared to be sleeping soundly. Tracker's eyes swept over Zoey's body. The sun streamed in, giving her an even golden sheen where the sun had baked her, and she was the color of bronze, a delicious caramel color, and her hair more blonde than usual. It had been the heat of the sun and the cool of the nights that had given her this beautiful, sensational tan. Zoey had never looked so beautiful and so sexy. She turned, facing Tracker, her eyes shut tight, still sleeping, and like a choreographed dance Thorn turned evenly with her. His large cock searching for her buttocks and then finding them, and in his sleep he gave out a soft moan of pleasure. It was as if he was searching for a treasure, and then had found it nestled close by. His hands fell over her and settled on her breasts, and he unconsciously cupped them. Tracker stood watching the two of them together, and longed for Zoey. He felt a desire creep into him and settle inside. That feeling wasn't entirely for her, but for the animalistic desires he had once held for her. The pleasure of seeing her body once more, his thoughts fell to the desire that he received from his length dipping into her soft flesh, into her opening, and how it had entered effortlessly. The pleasure he received from her could only come second to what he felt for Sadia's body. At the time before Sadia, he longed for the feelings he received from Zoey, and how once he was in her, his length vibrated with excitement, and how moist she had been with one touch. Zoey could have been the mate he would want, if he didn't want someone and something else, and Thorn hadn't fallen madly in love with her. He observed Thorn and Zoey for a while as her butt backed up to Thorn, his arm covering her, and both of them sleeping silently, and still unaware that someone was standing there watching them. Zoey was a distraction to Thorn as she had been to him, but more so with Thorn, because he loved her, and he would be blind to anything said about her, so Tracker held his opinions. Tracker thought about warning Thorn not to be too sidetracked and blinded by his love for her. He wanted to warn Thorn that Zoey was a desirable female in the world of men, and he could have many problems with men wanting to steal her or take her from him. But Tracker knew Thorn wouldn't listen, and he didn't want to waste his words, nor did he want to lose the love of his brother. The way their bodies were interlaced, and the way Thorn held Zoey to him with one hand, brother could either. They were one now. It was a realization that Zoey and Thorn had become more than just bodies to one another, when that was all she had been to him. There never had been a time when she had been an individual, a female, with a face where he could look into it without feeling that she was only someone to serve his needs during the time of the full moon, a faceless body that he could take and have when the time of the moon dictated. It wasn't that way with Sadia. He dreamed of her, and saw her face in everything he did, on every woman he saw walking the beach, on every woman he met and took to bed, in the few days they had been at that resort. Unconsciously, he then realized that he wanted Sadia. He needed her, but she had betrayed him when she chose to conceal her identity and conceal her scent. It became impossible for him to forget her duplicity. Tracker wondered what other things she had kept from him. Did her family know of her ways, and were they in on it? He had heard his father, Lysel, tell of werefemales who possessed unusual abilities to change their face and bodies, and have supernatural powers, but she didn't change her face. He saw the same innocent-looking face he had seen in high school, but because he hadn't thought of her, or seen her since she became of age, he hadn't recognized Sadia in the dim light of the club, and because she appeared different in her dress and behavior, he was unable to distinguish her from that scared young girl who had told all her classmates she was promised to Tracker, the most eligible werewolf shifter in Samseville. Sadia's body had changed, and she wore tight jeans over her curvy body and a tight shirt over her developed breasts. Because now she was a full-grown werefemale, and she had transformed her looks and dress, he wasn't able to recognize that innocent, shy werefemale from his high school days. Tracker shifted his weight ready to turn and walk out of the room, when Thorn's eyes suddenly opened. It was something that caused Thorn to feel the presence of another being, standing near his bed watching attentively. Maybe it was the change in temperature, or the wind, or the sunlight. Thorn's eyes focused. He didn't jump or conceal himself or Zoey. There was no point, because Tracker had seen and done more with Zoey than he had ever thought of undertaking. "What are you doing standing there dressed in your leathers?" He didn't wait for Tracker to answer. "I thought we all could go for a swim today, and have dinner tonight with the humans before we leave tomorrow. Zoey would like that." Thorn smiled and wiped his eyes. "Not today." Tracker's voice was unusually quiet. He didn't meet Thorn's eyes, which wasn't typical Tracker. His mind appeared to be concentrating on something else. Something serious. I'm going to leave you two and go on to Mexico and rent a villa for us. I think Zoey could use a little more rest, and you don't need me around." Tracker shot Thorn a small closed smile. When Zoey heard her name on Tracker's lips, she smiled in her sleep and gave a small inhale and exhale and held on to Thorn's arm. Thorn turned and watched Zoey lying on her back, her breasts uplifted, her nipples hard from the cool breeze blowing in through the patio door. Then she slowly turned to face Thorn and reached for him and draped her arm over his chest. Her buttocks were prominent in Tracker's view. Thorn looked up at Tracker's face. In his eyes he saw remorse, desire, and arousal, and Thorn reached for a sheet and spread it over Zoey's body, covering her from the hungry eyes of Tracker. "I think you're right. We need more time together, and you need to be alone to decide what it is you want to do. Whatever you choose, I will go along with you. If you want to just turn around and go back to Samseville and marry Sadia, then I will do that too. We could have a double wedding." Thorn closed with a grin in his playful, naive way, one eyebrow raising and his eyes showing bright and thoughtful. "Let's not get ahead of yourself. If you want to marry Zoey, then do so. I suggest you do it before you bring her back to Samseville. You know father." Thorn knew his father only too well, but a wedding would be out of the question, because by now the reports of Beau's death had to be front-page news, and since Zoey went missing at the same time as Beau had been killed by a large wolf, and a shotgun wielded by his uncle to ward off the wolf attack, but who had met the same fate, it would be very risky for both of them if they showed up now to get married legally. Tracker knew better, and Thorn knew better. The conversation was just to warn Thorn about their father, and to make him feel he wanted this marriage, and he wasn't jealous of their union. Tracker assumed that was what Thorn meant to do with Zoey, and wanted Tracker's blessing. Marry her, because after all she was human, and had the desires of most women. Thorn, being inexperienced and in love, would try his best to satisfy Zoey, no matter what the cost. Therefore, in a roundabout way, Tracker had sanctioned the marriage, whether legally or according to werewolves' laws, and he would get out of Thorn's way, whereby they could solidify their mating ritual.